All right, this is one I've wanted to do for quite a while, but obviously it's a super vague and subjective one where there's going to be just a ton of variety within the answers. Also, it's like, okay, what qualifies a star player as underappreciated? Is it not playing in a big market so he doesn't get a ton of media and fan coverage? Is it not getting recognized enough for how good he is? Or maybe it's not being ranked high enough or at all in top 10 lists or best players lists. There's a lot that goes into it, and for me, it's a bit of all of that. That's also where you come in, because you're surely going to have answers that I didn't think of that deserve some extra appreciation and maybe some extra eyeballs on them this upcoming season. And that's what I find cool about this idea. Might even make a part 2. For this one though, I've got 4 or 5 names in mind in no particular order. They're not ranked. Maybe you guys can rank them if you want. But let's get into it. We're starting in Seattle. It's Jared McCann. Now, I understand why McCann doesn't get a ton of buzz. He was a first round pick by Vancouver back in the day, had quite a bit of promise. Only played one season there where he showed some flashes, but he was still pretty raw. Gets traded to Florida for Eric Goodbranson. And while he was there, he really was just a fringe bottom 6 producer. Didn't really show much at all in the way of offensive pop. Then once he gets traded to Pittsburgh in 2019, that's when the ball starts rolling for him a little bit. All of a sudden he's getting you 14, 15 goals, 30 points. He's a good middle 6 guy. Then he gets traded to, not the Kraken, the Leafs. And this is one I'm sure Leaf fans are still peeved about because they got him like right when he was on the cusp of an offensive explosion, turning into a star basically. But nope, gets picked up by Seattle in the expansion draft and immediately scores 27 goals. Career high in tucks and in points. Then at 26, he's right in his prime. He follows that up with a 40 goal, 70 point season. By far his best in the NHL. Kraken make it all the way to the second round of the playoffs. All of a sudden, we're not talking about a bottom 6 producer or even a middle 6 guy anymore. Jared McCann's a star. And now he just finished his 3rd straight season with over 25 goals and over 50 points. This guy's a bona fide first line producer and really talented goal scorer. Look, in the long run, I do think Matty Beniers is going to be the marquee offensive player on this team, especially with the contract he just signed. But especially with the sophomore slump he's coming off of there, I think right now it's definitely McCann who's the guy there, the straw that stirs the drink. And he has been for a couple of years now, even when Beniers won the Calder. And I don't think 19 gets enough credit or recognition as that for the Kraken. Next up, we got a couple of superstars, but we're going to start with Barkov. I'm a little on the fence with this one because even like 2 years ago, for sure, you could say that he's one of, if not the most underappreciated, underrated player in the league. But since Tkachuk has got there, like the Panthers have gotten plenty of media coverage. They've gone on a couple of really long runs in a Stanley Cup, which if there's one thing you can do to get more people to realize how good you are, it's that. Barkov is widely recognized as one of the most elite two-way players in the entire game. So I'm unsure about having him here. You guys can give me your thoughts on it, but even just seeing like top 10, top 20 center rankings for this upcoming season, I find he still gets ranked quite a bit lower than I would have thought, despite literally being the most recent Selke Trophy winner. Again, it's not as blatant as a few years ago where he was like seriously underrated for how good he was. Like people knew he was a really good two-way first-line center, but I remember a good chunk of time there where the only time you'd really hear about Barkov is when he pulled off a silky shootout move. I'm not sure what more the guy has to do. Maybe it's cracking 100 points for the first time in a season, but even now after the Stanley Cup and the great playoffs he had, especially when you look at where he gets ranked in the best centers, best players lists, I still think 16 is underappreciated. Up next, it's nuts to call this guy underappreciated, someone who's only had under 40 goals once in his 4-year career, but I really don't think Kirill Kaprizov gets talked about enough for how good he is. Including on this channel, I've barely talked about this guy, and I really should because he's one of the most entertaining popcorn players in the whole league. Not counting the North Stars organization, just the Wild, since that franchise was brought in 2000, you're looking at some of the greatest players in the franchise's history in Mikko Koivu, Marian Gaborik, but even counting when Gaborik was in his prime and he was one of the most fun players in the whole league to watch, I'd still put Kaprizov ahead of him for the most talented Wild player of all time. We're talking about a guy here who routinely gets over 40 goals. He's always been right around 100 points or on pace for it, and he hasn't exactly had a ton of help around him. The Wild teams he's been on haven't been horrible, but they haven't been great either. If he isn't regarded as this already, I think he absolutely will go down as the best player in franchise history. And I know in Minnesota they adore this guy, they love having him. Remember dollar Bill Kirill and how much the fan base ran with that? But outside of that market, he really does seem underappreciated, by myself included. Sometimes I'm so wowed by the Bedards, the Matthews, McDavids, and the McKinnons of the world that I forget just how good this guy is. For the next guy in this, you must have known this was coming, Mikko Rantanen. I remember when this guy burst onto the scene in 2018 and he led the NHL in scoring for a few months. That was the moment where it was like, wow, okay, Mikko Rantanen has arrived and he's a superstar. And he hasn't slowed down since. He's been unreal for this franchise since coming to them 10th overall. That's kind of a steal in 2015. Of course, when Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar are on your team, you're going to get overshadowed a little bit. Of course, people still know that he's an elite talent, he's a superstar, and you can't mention the Avs core without mentioning 96. But we're talking about somebody here with back-to-back 100-plus point seasons. He's a 50-goal scorer, and he hasn't been under a point a game since the bubble-shortened 2019-20 season. And look at his numbers in the shortened 56-game 2020 2021 season. If that was a full 82 game year, his numbers would have been absolutely monstrous. With elite production like that, it's kind of wild that this guy hasn't gotten a single individual award in the NHL. He's one of the best offensive players in the game, and don't get me wrong, in Denver, they love the Moose. But man, it really feels like league-wide, those numbers and just how elite he is gets kind of lost behind the greatness of MacKinnon and Makar. Maybe lost is a little strong, but definitely downplayed or overshadowed, which is nobody's fault. It's just that's how it goes in the NHL sometimes, especially when you have other groundbreaking talents who are wowing the league every night. Next, we're going to St. Louis to talk about Robert Thomas. He's the marquee piece on this Blues team, and honestly, I think he's skyrocketed to being one of the best centers in the game, but you wouldn't necessarily know it unless you follow the league and the Blues somewhat closely. Like, I think this guy should be getting some serious buzz for Canada at the Four Nations and maybe even at the Olympics the year after. For quite a few people, if you were to ask, okay, who's the first current player you think of when you think of the St. Louis Blues? A lot of them would say Jordan Binnington, yes, because of the antics, but also because of the Stanley Cup, and because he's coming off a really good season that played a major role in keeping the Blues hovering around the playoff race for a while. But I think the true face of the franchise is Robert Thomas. I think he's the main piece they're building around, and rightfully so. He's a legit elite number one centerman, and a big reason why I think Ryan O'Reilly was made expendable by the team, which if you think about it, you gotta have a ton of faith in Robert Thomas if you're trading a guy who won a Conn Smythe and Stanley Cup with your franchise, was the captain of the team, and was the number one centerman, and as we're seeing now in Nashville, clearly had some really good years left. But when you look at the player Thomas has turned into, he was definitely up to the challenge. Alright, like I said, I want to make a part 2 of this video because there's so many names you can include here. Because of that, I want to throw in a couple honorable mentions, and remember, this is not most underappreciated players, because I would love to throw a Chris Tanev or a Connor Garland on this list, but I'm trying to think of this through the lens of star players. So for honorable mentions, Matt Barzal, Wyatt Johnston out in Dallas, yes, I believe he's already a star, Sebastian Aho, the Carolina one, and Josh Morrissey. Probably going to talk about some of those guys in part 2. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. You're awesome. Enjoy this last bit of summer you got left, and then hockey season's right around the corner. I'll see you soon. Peace out.